Did the Pope kneel before Attila? The most mysterious meeting in history. In the year 452 CE, the fate of Rome, and perhaps the entire Western world, hung by a fragile thread. The air was thick with fear and uncertainty as the mighty Huns, led by the infamous Attila, marched inexorably toward the Eternal City. Tales of their savage conquests had spread like wildfire across Europe, leaving behind a trail of destruction and despair. Empires trembled, armies fled, and people whispered of the end of an era. Amidst this storm of chaos, an unlikely figure stepped forward, Pope Leo I. With no sword to wield and no army at his command, this spiritual leader chose to face the barbarian warlord in a meeting that would become one of history's most enigmatic moments. According to legend, the Pope knelt before Attila, imploring him to spare Rome. The fearsome Hun, moved, or perhaps strategically persuaded, retreated, saving the city from destruction. But how much of this story is fact, and how much is myth? Did the Pope truly kneel before Attila, or is this a tale shaped by the hopes and fears of a desperate age? To understand this mysterious meeting, we must journey back into the turbulent times that gave birth to legends and shaped the destiny of civilizations. Part 1. The Rise of Attila, the fearsome leader. Attila was born into a world of turmoil and change. Around the year 406 CE, somewhere near the vast steppes of Central Asia or Eastern Europe. From the earliest days, he would come to embody the raw power and relentless spirit of the Huns, a nomadic people whose sudden and violent incursions into Europe sent shockwaves through the ancient world. The Huns themselves were shrouded in mystery. Fierce horsemen and expert archers, they were known for their unparalleled mobility and ruthless tactics. Their arrival on the European stage had devastated tribes and empires alike. To the Romans, they were barbarians, a scourge from the east. But the Huns saw themselves as heirs to a warrior tradition that prized strength, honor, and conquest. Attila's rise to power was marked by cunning and brutality. He initially ruled alongside his brother Bleda, jointly leading the Hunnic tribes. Together, they launched devastating raids against the Eastern Roman Empire, extracting vast tributes and demanding submission. But around 445 CE, Attila became sole ruler after Bleda's mysterious death. Some say Attila had a hand in it. As the singular king of the Huns, Attila unleashed a campaign of terror across the continent. His armies swept through the Danube region, invading territories with unmatched ferocity. Cities fell, their inhabitants massacred or enslaved. Roman generals trembled before his name, and emperors scrambled to negotiate peace or pay tribute. Yet, Attila was more than just a brute force. He was a shrewd strategist and diplomat, understanding the value of fear as a weapon. His letters to the Roman emperors were as much about intimidation as negotiation, mixing threats of annihilation with offers of alliance. The Western Roman Empire, weakened by internal strife and constant pressure from various barbarian groups, appeared vulnerable. Attila saw an opportunity to extend his power, pressing into Gaul, modern France, and Italy with his ruthless hordes. Among his many campaigns, the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains in 451 CE Street stands out, a brutal confrontation between Roman forces and their allies against Attila's army. Though the battle ended inconclusively, it halted the Huns' advance into Western Europe temporarily, but it was clear that the threat was far from over. As Attila's shadow loomed ever larger, fear gripped the people of Rome. The city, once the proud heart of an empire, now faced a menace that no legion seemed capable of repelling. It was in this desperate moment that Pope Leo I emerged not as a warrior, but as a man of faith and courage. Part 2. Rome on the Brink. By the year 452 CE, the Western Roman Empire was a shadow of its former self. Once the unchallenged ruler of the Mediterranean world, it now faced internal decay, political corruption, and relentless pressure from invading tribes. The grand city of Rome, the symbol of eternal strength, was vulnerable like never before. The imperial armies had been weakened by years of civil war and neglect. Resources were scarce, and the empire's borders stretched thin across vast territories, making effective defense nearly impossible. Meanwhile, barbarian groups such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths chipped away at Roman lands, carving out their own kingdoms. Against this backdrop, the arrival of Attila and his fearsome Huns was a cataclysmic threat. Stories of their speed, cruelty, and ferocity had spread far and wide. The very name Attila became synonymous with destruction and doom. His army was said to move like a storm, swift and devastating, leaving ruin in its wake. As the Huns crossed the Alps and entered northern Italy, panic seized the population. Refugees poured into Rome, fleeing the advancing enemy. The city's population swelled beyond its capacity, and supplies began to dwindle. The political leadership was paralyzed by indecision, unable to mount a coherent defense or negotiate terms. Amid the chaos, hope rested on an unlikely figure, Pope Leo I, the Bishop of Rome. Unlike the generals and politicians, Leo wielded no sword or army, only his faith, his voice, and his courage. Part 3. The meeting that shaped history. The details of the meeting between Pope Leo I and Attila remain shrouded in mystery, with accounts varying wildly across historical sources. Yet, what is universally agreed upon is the extraordinary courage it took for the Pope to face the feared warlord in his own camp. Accompanied by a delegation of senators, clergy, and advisors, Pope Leo traveled to meet Attila, reportedly at the invitation of the Hun king himself, or perhaps at the urging of Roman officials desperate for a peaceful resolution. The two leaders met somewhere near the river Mincio, close to modern-day Mantua. It was a tense encounter. Attila, known for his temper and ruthlessness, reportedly greeted the Pope with suspicion and disdain. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. The fate of Rome seemed to hang by a thread. According to legend, Pope Leo knelt before Attila, imploring him to spare the city from destruction. Whether the act was one of submission, humility, or strategic diplomacy is still debated. Some accounts say that Leo's words, combined with a sudden vision of Saints Peter and Paul appearing beside him, moved Attila to mercy. Others suggest a more pragmatic explanation. Attila's army was suffering from disease and famine, and his forces were stretched thin. The arrival of reinforcements from the Eastern Roman Empire threatened his rear. Choosing to withdraw was a calculated military decision rather than a response to spiritual plea. Despite the uncertainty, the meeting is often portrayed as a triumph of faith and diplomacy over brute force. The story of the Pope kneeling before the barbarian king endures as a powerful symbol of moral authority and courage in the face of overwhelming danger. Part 4. The mystery and its meanings. The enigmatic encounter between Pope Leo I and Attila the Hun has fascinated historians, theologians, and storytellers for centuries. But the truth of what actually transpired remains elusive, lost somewhere in the mists of time, buried beneath layers of legend and conflicting accounts. Ancient chroniclers offer differing versions of the event. Prosper of Aquitaine, a near contemporary, records that Pope Leo and a Roman delegation met Attila and persuaded him to withdraw, but offers little detail on the nature of the negotiation. Later writers, such as the historian Priscus, who had direct experience with the Huns, do not mention the meeting at all. This silence leaves room for speculation. The medieval Christian tradition embellished the story, portraying the Pope as kneeling humbly before Attila, invoking divine intervention. This imagery served powerful symbolic purposes. It cast the Church as the ultimate moral authority, capable of protecting the faithful even against the most fearsome worldly threats. Yet, Modern scholars question whether this narrative reflects historical reality or is a pious myth constructed to inspire hope in troubled times. Many argue that Attila's withdrawal from Italy was influenced more by practical military considerations than spiritual intimidation. At the time of the meeting, Attila's forces were suffering from outbreaks of disease and supply shortages. Moreover, news of Eastern Roman forces mobilizing against him in the Balkans likely forced his hand. His retreat might have been a strategic move to consolidate power rather than an act of mercy. Still, the question remains, why has this meeting captured imagination so deeply? Perhaps because it symbolizes the intersection of faith and power, diplomacy and force. It reminds us that history is rarely black and white, and that legends often arise from the human need to find meaning amid chaos. Part 5. A legacy beyond the meeting. Regardless of what truly happened on that fateful day, the meeting between Pope Leo I and Attila left a profound legacy. Attila himself died only a year later, in 453 CE, under mysterious circumstances. Without his strong leadership, the Hunnic Empire fragmented, and the tide of barbarian invasions into Roman territories gradually subsided. Meanwhile, the stature of the papacy grew significantly. Pope Leo I's role in confronting Attila enhanced his reputation as a spiritual and political leader. The Church's influence expanded in the power vacuum left by a declining empire, shaping the course of medieval Europe. The story of the Pope's encounter with Attila became a foundational legend for the Church, symbolizing divine protection and moral authority. It inspired countless works of art, literature, and religious teachings over the centuries, resonating as a timeless tale of courage and faith triumphing over fear and destruction. In a broader sense, this episode marks a pivotal moment in history, the transition from the classical world of emperors and legions to the medieval era dominated by religious institutions and new political realities. Did the Pope kneel before Attila? The question that endures. So, did the Pope kneel before Attila? The answer may forever remain lost to history, but perhaps the question is less important than the story itself. Its message of hope, courage, and the power of diplomacy in the darkest hours. In a world on the brink of collapse, a man without an army stood before a terrifying conqueror and demanded peace. Whether by faith, force of will, or circumstance, the encounter changed the fate of Rome and echoed through the centuries as a beacon of resilience. History is often shaped not just by what happened, but by what we remember and believe. The mysterious meeting between Pope Leo I and Attila the Hun remains one of history's greatest enigmas and a powerful reminder of the complex dance between power, faith, and humanity.